They tried to burn Bumpy's headquarters. What Bumpy built back in 3 days shocked the entire underworld. Date, November 12, 1935, location, the Renaissance Ballroom and Casino, 2348 7th Avenue, word count, 2045 hound. Sack Shocks 1, the Hulk Hostres, November 12, 1935, 3017 a.m., 2348 7th Avenue, the Renaissance Ballroom. Fire roared like a living beast, consuming the mahogany doors of Bumpy Johnson's central operation. The heat was strong enough to blister paint across the street. 12 men stood in the shadows of 138th Street, watching the flames dance. They held empty gasoline cans and wore smiles that would soon cost them everything. Inside the burning office sat ledgers detailing $2 million in policy banking numbers. If those books burned, Bumpy wasn't just out of business, he was dead. The entire Harlem underworld held its breath as the roof groaned. A siren wailed in the distance, useless and late. The leader of the arsonists lit a cigarette off the burning building. He thought he had just decapitated the king of Harlem. He thought the ashes would be Bumpy's grave. He was wrong. The fire wasn't an ending. It was a signal. Section 2. Context backstory * 2 weeks earlier. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was already a legend in the making, but in late 1935, his grip on Harlem was being tested. He wasn't just a gangster, he was the gatekeeper between the white mob downtown and the black residents of uptown. He walked with a limp but carried himself like royalty, armed with a switchblade and a mind sharp enough to quote Shakespeare while counting stack money. He didn't just run numbers, he ran the economy of the streets. He paid rents, bought turkeys for Thanksgiving, and settled disputes that the police wouldn't touch. But his independence was a thorn in the side of powerful men. The autumn of 1935 was a simmering cauldron of racial and economic tension. The Harlem riots of March had left scars on the avenues, and the Great Depression was tightening its chokehold. Every dollar was fought over with knuckles and brass. Dutch Schultz was dead, killed just weeks prior in October, leaving a power vacuum that sucked in every ambitious hustler in New York. The Jewish and Italian syndicates were circling Harlem like sharks, sensing weakness in the transition. They believed the black man couldn't hold the throne without a white sponsor. The stakes were astronomical. The Harlem Numbers game, the illegal lottery played by maids, porters, and churchgoers, generated over $50,000 a day in nickels and dimes. Whoever controlled the central bank controlled Harlem. Bumpy had consolidated the independent bankers under his protection, creating a fortress of finance that the downtown mob desperately wanted to breach. They didn't want a partner, they wanted a vassal. Section 3. The antagonist. The man holding the match was Salvatore "Sal the Torch" Borriello, a freelance enforcer often contracted by the lingering factions of the Schultz mob. Borriello was a pyromaniac with a business card. He didn't just kill men, he erased their existence. In 1933, he had burned down a textile warehouse in the garment district to settle a labor dispute, incinerating 3 night watchmen in the process. He was feared not for his aim, but for his absolute lack of restraint. He enjoyed the smell of gasoline more than the smell of money. Borriello wanted the bank. Specifically, he had been promised 10% of the Harlem take if he could break Bumpy Johnson's infrastructure. The remnants of the Schultz gang, led by a desperate lieutenant named Abe Landau, believed that if they destroyed the physical headquarters, the place where runners tallied the slips, panic would ensue. They thought the runners would defect, the money would stop flowing, and Bumpy would be left holding a bag of ashes. He was dangerous because he operated on chaos. He commanded a crew of 15 arsonists and wreckers, men who carried sledgehammers and Molotov cocktails instead of Tommy guns. They had already torched 2 independent candy stores on 125th Street as a warning. Borriello had sent a message to Bumpy's associate threatening to turn the Renaissance Ballroom into the world's biggest fireplace if Bumpy didn't surrender the policy slips. Borriello underestimated the structural integrity of Harlem and the man who built it. Section 4. The Traps in Coin 4. The Traps Confrontation * November 12th, 2 a.m. Borriello's plan was crude but effective. His men would breach the rear entrance of the Renaissance complex, douse the counting room in kerosene, and light it up. It was designed to look like an electrical accident, but the sheer volume of accelerant ensured total destruction. He believed Bumpy was asleep at his apartment on 121st Street. He believed the guards were paid off. Asterisk 2:15 a.m. Asterisk, the alley behind 7th Avenue smelled of wet garbage and impending doom. Borriello's men moved in silence, cutting the padlock on the service door. The metallic snap echoed slightly, masked by the rumble of the elevated train nearby. Inside, the counting room was dark. Rows of wooden desks stood silent. This was the nerve center where millions of slips were tallied. Asterisk 2:30 a.m. Asterisk, the men began pouring. Glug, glug. The stench of kerosene filled the room, soaking the floorboards, the desks, the curtains. Borriello stood by the door, a Zippo lighter in his hand. He flicked the lid open. Click. The flame danced, a tiny orange devil. "Burn it all," he whispered. Asterisk 3:17 a.m. Asterisk, the explosion blew the windows out onto 7th Avenue. Glass shattered like diamonds raining on the pavement. Orange tongues of fire licked the night sky. The heat was instantaneous and ferocious. Borriello and his crew retreated to the shadows of 188th Street, watching their handiwork. They laughed. They lit cigarettes. They waited for the fire trucks, knowing the response time for a black neighborhood would be slow. Asterisk 3:30 a.m. Asterisk, the fire department arrived, sirens screaming. Water arcs cut through the smoke. The Renaissance Ballroom's office was a charred skeleton. The desks were ash. The walls were black soot. Borriello turned to his second-in-command. "Tell Landau it's done. Johnson is finished. He's got nowhere to count the money." Asterisk, the next morning. 8 name. Ask. The sun rose over a blackened scar on 7th Avenue. The smell of wet ash was overpowering. A crowd gathered, grandmothers, schoolchildren, hustlers. They looked at the ruins with fear. If Bumpy could be burned out, who was safe? The neighborhood felt the vacuum. The murmurs began. Is Bumpy done? Did the Italians win? Then a black Cadillac pulled up. Bumpy Johnson stepped out. He wore a pristine gray suit, untouched by soot or stress. He looked at the ruin of his office. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He lit a cigar and looked at the crowd. "Show's over," he said calmly. "Get back to work. Sacute 5, the twist 5, the twist Fumpty's move." What Borriello didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson had been expecting him for a week. A cleaner at a downtown garage used by the Schultz mob had overheard Borriello bragging about lighting up Harlem. The cleaner told a runner, who told a lieutenant, who told Bumpy. The counter-move, asterisk 3 days before the fire, on asterisk November 9th, Bumpy had executed a silent evacuation. Under the cover of darkness, his men had moved the real ledgers and the cash reserves to the basement of a funeral home on 132nd Street. The books Borriello burned were old telephone directories and scrap paper. The desks were cheap replacements bought from a junk shop. Bumpy had allowed Borriello to burn a decoy, but the true twist was the reconstruction. Bumpy didn't just want to survive, he wanted to perform a miracle. He had secretly contracted every carpenter, mason, and electrician in Harlem. He paid them triple the union rate. Asterisk, the resurrection, as soon as the fire marshals cleared the scene at, asterisk, 10 a.m. on November 12th. An army descended. 50 men in overalls marched into the charred remains. Asterisk, day 1, asterisk. They gutted the burnt timber. Trucks hauled away the debris by the ton. Asterisk. Day 2, asterisk. New lumber arrived from a yard in the Bronx that Bumpy had compromised. Walls went up. Electricians rewired the grid overnight, working by lamplight. Asterisk, day 3. Asterisk, painters applied fresh coats of cream-colored paint. New mahogany desks were carried in. A brand new safe, heavier than the last one, was installed. Bumpy stood on the sidewalk, directing traffic like a conductor. He didn't sleep. He handed out coffee and cash. The community watched in awe. It wasn't just construction, it was defiance. On asterisk November 15th, asterisk, exactly 3 days after the fire, Borriello returned to the scene to gloat. He expected to see a boarded-up ruin. Instead, he saw a pristine office. The windows were new. The door was polished oak. The lights were on, and sitting in the window, visible from the street, was Bumpy Johnson. He held up a fresh ledger. He tapped the glass with his ring. Clink, clink. He picked up a phone, looked directly at Borriello across the street, and dialed. Sacket 26, Resolution/Aftermath, November 15th, 40 p.m. Ashk. Borriello stood frozen on the corner of 138th and 7th. He looked like he had seen a ghost. The phone in the booth next to him rang. He didn't want to answer it, but he had to. Hello? Borriello's voice cracked. You missed a spot, Sal. Bumpy's voice came through the receiver, cold as ice. Borriello dropped the phone. He turned to run, but he was boxed in. Not by Bumpy's hitmen, but by the community. A group of dock workers blocked the sidewalk. A street vendor moved his cart to block the street. They stared at him. The message was clear. You are in Bumpy's house. That night, Borriello was found in a dumpster in the Bronx. He wasn't burned. He was simply removed. The message to the Schultz faction and the 5 families was unmistakable. You can burn the wood, but you cannot burn the man. The ripple effects were immediate. The independent bankers who had been wavering pledged absolute loyalty to Bumpy. They saw him as invincible. If he could rebuild a fortress in 3 days, he could do anything. The payments to the downtown mob stopped completely. The police captain of the 28th precinct came to the new office the next day, took his hat off, and asked Bumpy if everything was up to code. It's better than code, Bumpy replied. It's Harlem built. Sacu 27, Legacy 3, Lex June. The miracle on 7th Avenue cemented Bumpy Johnson as more than a gangster. It made him a folk hero. It demonstrated that his power didn't come from violence alone, but from infrastructure and community resourcefulness. He used the very labor force that society ignored to build his empire back up. Literally overnight, this story reveals Bumpy's core philosophy: preparation beats desperation. While his enemies were focused on destruction, he was focused on continuity. He understood that in the underworld, perception is reality. By showing he couldn't be interrupted, he proved he couldn't be defeated. Asterisk, universal lesson. True power isn't about avoiding the fire, it's about how fast you can rebuild from the ashes. It's about having a foundation so strong that even a scorched earth policy fails. Asterisk, if you want to know how Bumpy outsmarted the FBI for a decade, hit that subscribe button. Like this video if you respect the hustle. Comment below what's your rising from the ashes moment. Next week, the day Bumpy Johnson challenged the Italian mob to a fistfight.